Okay, cool. So I think we can begin. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the webinar. The webinar is titled Common Challenges with Karthik KK. So there'll be an open dialogue between me and Karthik where we talk about some common automation challenges. I will caveat that this is a pre-recorded session just because Karthik is in New Zealand and because of the time difference, he couldn't make it here with us today. So we've invited Andreas Willig, who is our community manager, and he will be my glamorous assistant today in place of Karthik. And obviously myself, Jordan Weston, user journey support engineer at SpecFlow. So a couple of housekeeping comments. So as I mentioned, this is pre-recorded. So with regards to the Q&A, obviously we can't stop and answer them on the fly. So please put them in the Q&A and we'll come to them at the end. The video or the recording is about 1 hour and 5 minutes long. So there's plenty of time at the end to talk through the Q&A. And of course, everyone will receive a recording of the webinar after it's concluded. We send a mail out to all of the registrants. So you can expect that in your inbox. Cool. So with that, then let's begin, and excuse my crude transition. And let me know if you can hear the audio, Andy.
No.
Oh, okay. Good start. Good start. How are we going to tackle this?
There's a Zoom start settings that you send the computer sounds with.
Yeah, sounds good. And can you hear it now?
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
So
okay, perfect. Let me make it full screen and we'll just run with it.
First topic we talk about is going to be the dependency. The first topic we're going to talk about is going to be on the driver handling problems, right? Okay. So this is one of the common questions which we get from the community, asking like how we can handle a web driver, especially while they write the Selenium code. It can be any driver, right? It can be a Playwright driver, and I've seen the Selenium SpecFlow's action, which has got a lot of plugins that you have already written, which is great. I mean, SpecFlow team is already improving that, but I think that this is one of the things that also comes across, like how to handle the drivers. So as we can see here, this is I have just created like two ways to handle the driver problems. One is one is using the SpecFlow, and another one is using dependency injection, which I will show later on. That's the next question. But the driver problem is over here. As we can see in this particular code, we have this driver, which is like the browser driver, which is going to get the Chrome driver or Firefox driver, whatever. And then there is this driver fixture, which is going to get the web driver, whatever that we're passing in, like the browser type. If you pass Chrome or Firefox, it's just going to get the browser type for us. But at the moment, for the simplicity purpose, I'm just passing it like a default parameter to get just the Chrome driver. And yeah. And the scenario over here, as you can see, that we're trying to get the WebDriver object using the iClass fixture, and then we create the driver fixture, and then we get the driver over here. The problem is, like, for every class file, so at the moment there is only one class file, but if you have like 10 or 15 class files which are going to have multiple test methods, then each and every class files will have their own drivers, something like these. And we have to ensure that the driver objects are correctly passed across each class files. And they also are passed inside the page object model code if we have one. So yeah, that's kind of I think I just call it as like the separation of concern, where the testers are not only focusing on writing the test, but they're just focusing more towards handling the web driver itself, which is kind of not a great thing that they can do. But over here, as you can see, it is not separation of concern, because they're handling the driver in every instance where the classes are going and it's working fine or not. That's what they are actually working on. So that is about one of the driver problem. And if there is an extension method like an element extension method over here, which if they requires a driver object anywhere, then they again have to pass the WebDriver object into that particular utility class file. And that becomes another problem because you're still passing around the object across the class files and maintaining the sessions. And when it comes to parallel execution, that becomes even more problematic because you have to maintain the object across all the different browser types. So that's about one of the driver problems, and that's about the classical way of writing the code that we have seen here. But one of the solution that I think is much better we can write in the SpecFlow to handle the driver problem that we just mentioned is using the SpecFlow's on context injection, where we can actually pass this scenario context and then we can store the driver object. So this is pretty much exactly the same replica of the driver fixture that I have written, but just that I'm storing the SpecFlow's context where I'm actually storing the driver object over here, pretty much like a collection.
Yeah.
The same code here. And within the hook, I'm actually, like before scenario, I'm getting the particular driver, like the SpecFlow's context injection. I'm just calling it over here. I'm getting the particular driver. And then within the step definitions, we are actually going to get that particular driver and play around with it. So you can see that we are actually not worried about how the driver is or even being spawned, because it's going to be handled on the hook. And on the test side, we're just focusing on the separation of concern, which is nothing but focusing just on the test rather than the driver object itself. So yeah, that's one way of writing the code. Yeah, that's what I think it's the better way of writing the code using the SpecFlow, as well as with many different you can write.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you can see over here on this particular code, it still has the class file, like the home page. It is getting the driver object as one of the parameter inside it. But you may be thinking like, hey, Karthik, again, this is going to be pretty much the problematic thing, right? You just told about the driver handling that you're passing the driver object everywhere, and still you're doing the same thing even for the resolution. So what is the better way of writing the code? And that's when my next question comes in, which is going to be the SpecFlow's dependency injection. So yeah, that's another way of writing the code as well. So I can actually show that code. So with the dependency injection, which is the next question among the community, asking like how to really handle the object in a much better way. So the page object model code that I just showed over here, as you can see, the home page or whatever page that we have, like product page, each and every pages actually has got the driver fixture, which is pretty much like the driver fixture that we just saw. But all these concrete classes are going to be like an interfaces, like an abstract, so that they don't really call the actual concrete implementation, rather the interfaces itself. But these are going to be registered in the dependency injection. So basically all the dependency injections are going to be done on one place, in one single place, where you can see that we have registered our driver fixture, our home page, product page, a browser driver, whatever that we have. And all these objects are then going to be used across anywhere on the class file. So that way, what it tells us that if you're going to be writing any of the steps, let's say product steps, then we don't have to worry about passing the driver object anywhere on that particular class itself, like homepage, because we don't even create an instance of the concrete class file. Rather, we just call the interface, we pass it on the context injection, pretty much like how we do in the SpecFlow's context injection, but this is basically a dependency injection. And then we call the methods inside it. So this way it resolves the problem of having the driver object being passed across multiple class files.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the implementation you're using, that's from .NET, isn't it? That's the .NET dependency injection framework, right?
Yes, this is one of the dependency injection framework. But actually, thankfully within SpecFlow, there is also one of the library that I have used, which is nothing but the solid token.specflow.dependency injection. This is the one which the community team has implemented, where you can use pretty much exactly the same Microsoft's dependency injection, but just that it is more aligned towards SpecFlow. The reason
I
being,
actually haven't seen that one.
it's pretty cool. So if you just go over here, you can see the startup file. We have something called as scenario dependencies. So there is an attribute which is decorated for the service method, which can then help to create the containers and service being registered, and all those containers are going to be resolved while you can't call that particular concrete class. Yeah, that's the best way of writing the code, I think, to handle the driver objects and handling all the objects across the test. This is more aligned towards the product development code itself. Like if I show you the startup file, see, this is how we use in the ASP.NET, right? Like add transient, all these things. So this is exactly the same. And that's the reason I actually like it, because it aligns with my code development as well. Yeah. Off the camera is over.
And also with the BODI, I think everything gets registered as a singleton, right? So, but I think, so the way that there's like different levels of containers. So there's like a global container, like a feature level container, a scenario level container inside the BODI, right? So you don't have the flexibility with like creating a transient service, a scope service, etc., etc. So
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that's the good thing about this dependency injection as well, is like it gives us the flexibility. You brought a good point, because it gives us the flexibility, like what kind of object scope that you want to, like a scoped object, or what is the lifetime that you want to define. Because you can see within the WebDriver initialization, I use what is called as a singleton, because I don't want to call this read configuration file for like every time the object is being created, just one time. Similarly, if it is going to be a repository pattern that I'm going to be calling, it should be transient, because it is going to be calling the DB context. And the home page is going to be, I think it's singleton, but scoped, I don't know why. But yeah, you can do that. So you can register the lifetime. That's the beauty of it as well. Yeah. So
it's more flexible, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I'm pretty sure SpecFlow supports AutoFac as well.
Yes.
As amongst some other DI frameworks that we have plugins for. But yeah, I've not actually used those. But
yeah, I've seen AutoFac. It's also been used. Actually, it's been covered in my course.
There you go. Nice plug.
Yeah. So it's actually covered in my course, but the reason why this code doesn't exist in here is because the code has been refactored a lot. Yeah. Okay.
And what's the name of the course so people can find it?
Oh, okay. So this is the course which I was talking about, which has got all the code that we are seeing over here on the Visual Studio right now. Like it has the development of the application, like even it includes the application development, like from the scratch, from zero code. And then it also has the like how you can write the traditional automation code using just like XUnit. And then we can use, we can write our own framework, and then we can write the BDD code. And we also write the integration test codes, which actually is 100 times faster than the UI testing. But yeah, that's all covered in this particular course. So yeah, that's about this is the course name, Advanced Automation Testing of Modern App with C#.NET. Cool. It actually includes those things. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is the dependency injection. And the next one we can talk about is the retry mechanism, which I think it's pretty cool on SpecFlow, because I've seen people asking this question, like how do you retry a failed test, like every time if the test actually fails? How do I make that happen? So there is this at retry annotation, which actually helps you do that. But where is this at retry annotation coming up? It's a tag. Where is this coming up? Is basically there is this tool in the SpecFlow, which is developed by the SpecFlow community. It's actually called as xretry.specflow. So this library, it's there in a NuGet package, which actually is compatible with .NET 6 and all the latest toolings. And also it's actually basically using the X retry of X unit. That's why it's X retry. And it's been extended for SpecFlow so that we can actually use it for the failed test as well as the passing test. I can probably show you a quick demo of how it's going to look like so that we can understand.
Yeah, I've not seen this. I've not seen this at all. I remember you mentioned it in one of our previous meetings, so
Yeah,
I'm interested to see how it works.
yeah, I'll just show you that, like how it's going to look like. So Docker compose. I think I have already built the application. All right, the applications, the tests are just starting up. Yeah. All right. So while this is happening, I think the application is already up here. So if I go to localhost 5001, so this is the application which has got the product or whatever, which is great. And now we're going to write the test over here. At the moment, if I try running this particular test, let me see. Yeah, this is run settings, correct. So I'm going to run this particular test, create product and verify the details, which is this one. So at the moment, if I try running this test, let's see what's going to happen. So you can see that at the moment, the test actually passed here. The reason being it is a passing test and it's not doing any retry mechanism for us. But now what I'm going to do, I want to make this test to fail. And I want it to retry like 4 times, or maybe just for time being 3 times. So at the moment, what I'm going to show is I'm going to click this details link. I definitely think this details link is correct because it is going to be looking for the operation here. And this operation is exactly the text that I'm looking for, which is going to be written on the home page. So it is exactly the operation. This is what it's looking for. Okay, cool. Exactly, that's the one. So if you see on this particular page, it has a details link over here. So we're going to click that particular details. So let's see if I make this details to detail so that the test will fail. And now we're going to retry for 3 times. And we'll see what is going to happen this time. This test should fail. It shouldn't be clicking the details for us. And you can see that the test is actually waiting. It failed for the first time. It is waiting, failed for the second time. It is failed for the third time. And it has got fully failed. And there we go. The test has got failed 3 times. So
is it retrying the entire test, or is it just retrying to find this details link, or what's the situation? Because visibly I didn't see the browser. Was it the same browser instance, or
no?
What was going on?
Going to be opening the browser 3 times.
3 times,
like
okay.
Completely independent test. It is not just that particular link, that particular step, but it's going to be retrying the whole scenario for us.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and just wanted to. I mean, it's pretty much like in Playwright, they have this feature called as retry. It's pretty much exactly the same idea, but just that it is going to keep retrying like 3 times. It is going to be helpful on the Docker side. I mean, if you're going to be running inside a container or something like that, like in a remote machine, sometimes the remote machine goes slow. The retry will be helpful. But also with the retry, there is also a better way of doing it in the visuals. I mean, in the Docker world, where we can actually tell that just go look for the Docker compose file. I can just quickly show that. On the Docker compose file, you have something called as the restart on failure. So this is also going to be helpful if we wanted to test like at least 3 or 4 times, like whether the test has got failed because of the application or the container or some connectivity. So we can use this restart on failure as well. That's another way of doing it.
That's cool. And is there any other configuration for the what was it called? Retry?
No.
Yeah.
There is
So it's
no
literally just this tag that it
That's
hooks
it.
into, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So it's a simple kind of retry framework then, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very, very simple kind of retry. It's really cool. We can
Okay.
use it. Yeah.
Cool.
That's about the retry. And the next thing which I wanted to show is the cleanup of, the database cleanup, like every time what the test actually executes. Because we have been saying that this test is actually executing at the moment. And every time you see that the test is actually creating some junk data in here, like standing table, like that. But what if I wanted to run this test in such a way that it creates a clean data, runs the test, and exits with clean state? It doesn't really pollute the data completely. So how do we actually do that? That's what is called as the data setup. Like we do the data setup, run the test, and clean up the data. And one of the example is here. For example, if I wanted to create a product and verify the details, then I can just go create a product from the product menu and enter the product details, and then I verify whether the product exists that I created or not, which I created, and then I delete the product which I just created. So this is one way of cleaning up. And the other way of cleaning up is before the test starts, we can also ensure that whatever the data that we're going to be creating on this particular feature file, we just put them all over here as a list so that we can go ahead and delete them as well. So that is another way of doing it. The reason why we actually do it on the background is because what if that test fail in one of the step, even before it hitting this particular step definition, that step, right? So if it fails on this line number 18, for some reason, because of the detail, for example, in here, the detail was wrong and the test got failed. So this particular cleanup is not even going to be called. So we can actually do this either in the background, or we can also use hooks to like after scenarios.
I was going to say that because in my opinion, I guess you're almost sacrificing the readability of the scenario, right, or the feature file. So
Yeah. Right. That's the reason why I don't prefer to put everything on this on the after scenario, being like it's going to be like a bulk data cleanup rather than the cleaning of the single scenario data itself. That's another trade-off that we have with the hooks. Yeah, so that's about the data cleanup and stuff. And I think that's a good practice as well. Like if you're going to be dealing with multiple datas, and if you're going to keep polluting the data on the application, then it's going to be confusing as well. So it's better that we handle the database tables in such a way that we clean up the data, set up the data. And one of the other example is this one. For example, if I want to edit a product, then I don't really have to do the same create operation in the UI. I can just create the product on the database straight away first, directly like injecting the data in the database. And then I do the edit operation so that I just focus on the edit operation rather creating the data in the UI, because it's already tested here. Why do we really again do the same operation for the edit as well, like creating the table, the product? So that is other way of doing it. So I'll just quickly show like how this thing actually works. So basically, let me stop this test, the whole application, because you can see there are a lot of data sitting there. I'm just going to down/v, remove the volumes. All right, the database is up and everything. So I'm going to show like how we can actually do the database testing. So for doing that, I'm just going to run all the tests here, and you may be seeing the application being spawned. Yeah, there we go. So it's creating the data, and it is also deleting the data for us while it is going through. And now if I show the application, so you can see that earlier there were 3 products, and if I refresh, it just added one of the products is monitor, because the monitor is not something we are deleting it like second time, we just created for the first time. And even if I run the same test again, it is not going to fail because the monitor already exists there. The reason being, it is going to clean up the data like the monitor or the headphone if it exists, and then it is going to run the test for us to ensure the test is passing. And you can see that the monitor is still 400, which is this one, which came over here. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, what's the code behind the database, the CRUD operations or whatever for the database? So deleting so you've got and I delete the product monitor for cleanup.
Yeah.
How does that look behind there?
Okay, so basically, yeah. So basically, all these delete operations are happening on the. Let me just show you over here. Go to the definition. So you can see that we're just calling directly the product repository, which is the repository pattern of the application itself. So we're directly calling the application's APIs, which is going to be doing that for us. And it's going to be calling the actual database entity framework to delete the products. So this way it's more cleaner because we're exercising directly the product's functionality rather writing our own wrapper on the top of the product's functionality so that it makes things messy.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that's about how we can handle the database deletion.
So I will start off by showing you the web app that I created, just for context, I suppose.
Yep.
So it's loaded on the other page. Let me just ping it up here. So it's a simple MVC application, and it has some basic validation here. So I'll submit to disabled. So if I just, I don't know, type in an incorrect password or something, we get this basic validation. Yep. The submit button is disabled until I've got some values in here. And when I submit, I come to this page where it has this alert, has this mailing list pop up, and it has this carousel of webinars that take you to the site, basically. So
awesome.
That's kind of it. And it says welcome, whatever your username is. There is actually no login, authentication implemented here, so it will just accept anything as long as the username and password is correct. And actually, the main focus is going to be this page. Actually, so we're not actually doing anything in the next page. I was going to, and then I kind of figured I didn't need to make it so complicated. So so that's the application. And I guess just to begin with, I'll mention how I'm launching the application. So you were using Docker to obviously spin up the application. The way I'm doing it is in my hooks. Which one is it? Here, so I'm actually hooking into the host builder from the application, and I'm basically starting the host from the tests, and then and obviously,
awesome.
The only nuance to this is because of the current directory is the test project. You have to basically point the content root of the application. So
get that UI up and running.
Exactly. So that's how I'm starting it. So what's the first, my first topic here is changes to UI elements / flaky selectors. Okay. So let's go, actually, let's just launch the application again. So people are told, not to use XPath, to use IDs in their selectors, right? So when you're locating a page element using Selenium, you need some way of hooking into the UI. And if we inspect this element here, let me just expand this a bit so it's a bit easier to see. We have this ID username that we could use. Maybe there's a value somewhere, there's the name also. That's fine. And these are obviously much better than using XPaths. However, these things are still subject to change because, IDs can be linked to JS, other mechanisms, other hooks inside of the actual application. So the UI dev might just come along and update it, and then all of a sudden your tests start failing because the locator is wrong, basically.
Correct.
So my proposed solution is that we can leverage a custom attribute. So let's flick back to the application. Let's go into the views, home index. So for example, this is obviously the view for the index page or the login page, whatever you want to call it. And you can see that I've added this. So this obviously is the C# or generated text box. And I've basically just added an attribute, this data attribute, and this data attribute is specific to our QA, right? It can be called whatever, but it's specific to QA, and hopefully if the team's informed, then things should go a lot smoother through development, because they might say, okay, the UI dev might say we might need to test this, we might need to hook into this, so we'll add an attribute, and this can just be left alone, right? Like, it doesn't need to change. It's not related to anything else other than the need for the hooking into the QA.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's and then honestly, so in a previous life when I was doing test automation, this honestly was such a saving grace.
Exactly.
Because culturally there was this divide, right, between automation testers and the product devs.
Exactly.
And testers, right? It was like they were siloed in this little team, right? That they were doing their own thing, and they were kind of weren't really too involved with the development team as such. You're always fighting the devs, and this becomes a maintenance nightmare, because especially in large applications, because a lot of change is happening. Maybe you're running tests overnight. You come in the morning and you see there's a bunch of broken tests. It takes time to investigate those tests. What's right, what's wrong, what should be happening, what is the requirement, how should it be working? It's just a nightmare, honestly.
Exactly. Yeah. And also this code reminds me one more thing, that you're also letting the developer testers to be part of the code development. Like, they just have the liberty to go add some of the IDs or attributes what they wanted. So that will help them to understand the code structure, like where they wanted to change, and it helps even more better way to read the code of the application, at least the UI, the view level, which gives them an idea, not just relying on the developers to tell them that just create a ticket and wait for them to create the object or identifiers, which is not going to happen anywhere. So yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, I've just updated one to this password field. You can see it's appeared here. So yeah, so it's super interesting. And I have actually thought about, I didn't do it for this demo, but almost from the code side of things, enforcing the locating strategy to use this. So you could maybe extend the by class. So when you're writing new tests, new code, maybe you're building a new page, when you're locating your page element, you can actually enforce looking for this attribute, right?
Yeah.
And then it needs some value. So you can actually go one step further and say, okay, we need to use this every time. So let's enforce it inside of the test code as well. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So
makes sense. Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, it's just a thought. I don't know whether that's being a bit, closing people off. Do you know what I mean? Not giving them the opportunity to, because maybe it's not the right thing to do all the time. I don't know. But just speculation. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'll just go and show one of the pages that actually it's in the other. So this login page elements. Obviously this is how it wouldn't look, because we're using it by ID, so it makes no sense. But we would go and update it in here. Right?
Okay.
So
you're gonna say maybe like a scaffolding code that should be
and
it should
right, exactly. So you can then just tap into those exclusively and basically not give them the opportunity to locate any other way, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, okay.
See what I mean? So it's almost like enforcing this location strategy, but I guess the team would need to be heavily worked. The team would need to be well oiled, and communication would need to be good, which doesn't always happen, unfortunately, in the test automation world. But
actually, you know what? That just reminds me that we could write, because in Visual Studio they also brought this templating coding, that the T4 templating coding that you can customize as well. Like every time while a view is created, it should automatically add the customized ID attributes. Like it should enforce that it is created. But ID is something which is automatically created. But if you want to have that custom attribute that you're just talking about, the data QA, something like that. Using the template coding, the T4 templating, you can actually enforce that every time the UI is created, it should automatically add that custom attribute for every single object, so that within the scaffolding code that we create in the SpecFlow, if they add a page object model code, that should automatically have those as well. Like, yeah, I think we can extend it, but probably later point of time conversation. It'll be great if you do it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are great ideas that I don't really see in test automation projects, but maybe I should write them down.
Yeah,
maybe I should publish them somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So that
idea.
that was the first thing.
Okay.
So let me stop this.
Yep.
So the next thing I want to talk about then is abstracting the test implementation out of the tests into its own automation layer, I guess, right? So we're not muddying things here. So this is our login steps currently. And you can see we've got references directly to, well, this actually gives us access to this browser interactions, which has access to the driver subsequently. But this is getting our page elements. So we've got our locators directly in the steps, which is definitely not a good approach. We're also talking about implementation specific details here. Because we're directly acting on these locators, so here, for example, which is also not a good thing in the interest of maintenance or time, in fact, as well, or upgradability.
Exactly.
So these are all things that which are a big no-no for me, especially when you get into larger test projects. So the first thing I think that makes perfect sense is to structure your pages, right? So you've already talked about this too, where you have specific pages that separate the functionality. So it has its own concern, which is what does this page do? We're describing the page as an object, basically, right? So we have the URL, and we've got things that we can do with the page. And we have this login page elements here, which the login page inherits. So again, it's another layer of separation. So the login page elements is obviously responsible for getting the reference to the element. So we're using the current driver instance, which is managed by this browser interactions. We're returning the web element right to the login page, and then further again. Further layer of abstraction is to, in fact, let me just, because I do have the correct, so let me include this in the project because this is the one I initially wrote.
Yeah.
So this is how I would like it to look. So we have only interfaces only references to interfaces being injected through the constructor. Yeah. And therefore, if we go to this here. This login page describes what we can do with the page, right? And actually, further abstraction is this iPage. So we want to go to every page. Well, maybe not necessarily, but potentially. And every page has a URL, right, that we might need to have access to for various reasons. So there's that deeper level of abstraction. And because of this, if our login page ever changes, I mean, on a login page, we're always going to need to log in, right? Yeah. So this interface is valid. Maybe there's some pages that interfaces wouldn't be suitable for if they're more dynamic. Maybe they're not so focused on doing a particular thing. But in this case, I think it makes sense. The dev team do a complete redesign of the UI. This means that everywhere that we consume the login page, we can switch the implementation out easily, right?
Exactly.
And if we look in here, I'm actually using BODI or BODI or whatever you want to call it to register my instances. Yeah. So obviously you're familiar with dependency injection, but for the people listening, we would just need to switch out this one implementation, right? Or even just modify the existing one, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And everything will continue to work as normal because of the contract to the interface. So
in my course, I actually covered this topic, especially because this is the way forward pretty much like
Yeah.
how the application is being developed, because this is how the applications are being developed. So why not we can just use the same pattern for the testing? Because at the end of the day, we are working on the same agile team. Even developers can contribute to the test automation, but if they come and contribute to the test automation, the code should be a bit more legal to see it is readable, and even they should relate what we are trying to write here. But they shouldn't be seeing our automation code as an alien, like pretty much like a code which is written by a kindergarten student or something like that.
Or by me.
No, I'm just saying, because this code is
Yeah.
good. I mean, this is how it should be written, right? So that's the way forward as well. I mean, yeah, that's how the code should be written. It shouldn't be, testers' code should not be taken as a code which is not something fit for engineering. It should have all the engineering thoughts that you said in a novel way. I think that should be there as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And especially if your project's massive, because you're going to have a lot of problems with maintenance, duplication, things like this, right?
Yep. Because I've seen that. Yeah. Excuse me for that. Actually, I've seen this, like most of the test automation code, they start off with some POCs and they just get bigger. But at the end of the day, just focus on writing the scenarios, but they leave the underlying, the base foundation of the better writing code. And at the end of the day, that automation code becomes like a maintenance nightmare than the application code itself. So that's become even more problematic.
Yeah, agree. And of course, because we only have access to, this abstracted login method, right? Like this class has no understanding of what this login method is doing behind the scenes. It just knows what we need to pass in as parameters. It does something and then it continues, right? So
exactly.
Everything's abstracted away using this the use of interfaces and this page object pattern. So yeah, I feel like this is obviously, page object pattern is nothing new. But definitely I've seen page object pattern used a lot, but in conjunction with interfaces, I've basically never seen it. So, and it's super important. So the next thing I would like to talk about is implementation agnostic features, right? So this is something that comes up all the time, and I don't know how many projects I've seen where we have, this is actually still pretty tame. Sometimes I see, given I do this and I click this and I write this in this text box and I do this in this text box. It's just not a good approach. Some people like it. Fair enough. If it provides you and your team value, then great. Go ahead. But it just causes problems with maintenance again. Maybe it's readable in terms of someone can follow through, as a script as such. A tester could go, okay, I need to do this now, I need to do this now, I need to do this now. But I guess you could argue it's not necessarily the purpose of what a feature file is for. So obviously here in these examples, we've got examples of where we're talking about the UI. So we're going to the login page. So we're already talking about a web page, right?
Yep.
Or some sort of app or whatever. And I submit my details, I click, so we're doing something, we're saying we're clicking something, I click login. Again, we're talking about implementation details. So really we want to avoid any of that stuff. So let me just comment this out. Okay, it's just being slow. And let me uncomment this. Cool, so now we've gone from having all of this detail in here to a short and concise scenario, right? So now we've got given I have an invalid username, and the invalid username is clearly defined here. So we can see what is a valid username, what is an invalid username.
Yeah.
And we're actually testing this too using the website itself.
Yeah.
So we're hooking into
the model
website
directly.
itself. Exactly. Well, actually, this user model so the model for the page has some attributes that decorate the properties.
Correct.
So right, and one of this is this regex pattern, which I've made public specifically so we can access it, right?
This is really cool. The reason being, we can directly check, because this is one of the part of the integration testing model where they check in the ASP.NET integration testing, where they can directly check the models and the views instead of having the view like view with data. Doesn't matter, because data you can test it separately, and the view you can test it separately. I think this is touching that part where you test directly the models and the view, like what data it should be returning back for that particular UI. I think, yeah, this is pretty cool.
This is nice, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's super cool. Based on what we can clearly see is invalid, because at face value, without this context, what is valid, what is invalid, but we've got it defined here, so that's super useful. And then when I log in, then simply I'm not logged in, or I am logged in, basically. So it's clear, it's concise. You can see, quickly and easy to read, what should happen in that scenario. So yeah, super nice.
I like that
cool.
star, line number 38 that you have,
yes.
like asterisk of the. What is this one? Is it kind of what? So basically, instead of doing anything like and you just put it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is actually part, and not many people know about this. This is included in the Gherkin syntax, right? This is valid Gherkin.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, it just acts like an and or a but does. It just takes on the role of the previous step that precedes it. So if it comes after a given, then it becomes a given. If it comes after a when, then it becomes a when, etc.
There is no step here for this scenario. So
yeah, I think it defaults to a given.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it defaults to a given. So
okay, no, that's really good.
Yeah, and what you said is exactly right. Instead of having and right, you can just have the asterisk, which makes it much easier.
I think
exactly, and you can treat them like bullets. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think I like this one. I like this.
A lot of people dislike this, if I'm honest. I've heard a lot of negativity.
If you just keep writing, because sometimes it becomes even more redundant, that you say like given I, and I, when I mean, that's kind of redundant now, but rather you just put like an asterisk, you just put a point like what you're trying to do, and you can probably expand the sentence a bigger. But yeah, I think that this is looking good. I like it.
I think also maybe it has the danger of making it easy to write tests that are still easy to read that are long, or scenarios that are long. I think it might encourage bad behavior. I think maybe that's why it's seen as a bad thing, right? Because you can add lots of asterisks and it still looks pretty clean. Yeah. But obviously many steps is maybe a bit of an anti-pattern. So we will move on to the third scenario, and this may be a bit controversial, but I like this. And I'll explain why. So basically, say you've got an application, right, and you have a sys environment, and you have a runway environment, you have a staging environment, whatever the case, pre-prod environment, whatever the case might be. So just like your app config, the actual app you're testing, it would have different configuration values, right, for databases, for APIs, whatever the case might be, and usually you'd have separate configuration files for that, right, and you would build it against that config. The application would run and pick up these values at runtime, and everything's sweet. So the same can obviously be achieved in our test project, right? So we have this test settings.json, which could include service endpoints, your page paths, your domain, your connection strings, just as you would expect normally. The name of the test environment, maybe you want to log that out somewhere, who knows. But you can basically have these config transforms. So we've got one for staging, we've got one for sys.
Yep.
And you simply build against that config. And you do the build, test settings.json gets overwritten. And at runtime, we have this this model, right, which doesn't do a lot. It just has a record at the moment for test environment and domain. Obviously, could be expanded to whatever. And then we get the configuration, and we just store it. And then we can, because it's static, we can refer to it at any time within our logic. And I've got an example of this. I think it's in Here, yep. So I'm using the SpecFlow output helper to output to the console. But basically, I'm just saying the test execution started for this particular environment and this particular domain. Just to showcase it, I'll just quickly run it. Cool. So we can see it passes, and we can see in the standard output, test execution started for environment staging, and here's the domain. So we're just logging something out to the standard out, basically, of the.
All right. Okay. It's like an ITest output helper of XUnit.
Yeah. Let me just go into the object a bit so we can see maybe a bit more about what it does. So maybe we're getting a bit off topic there. Let's see. So right line, add attachment.
Add attachment. What is that doing?
So actually, I think all it does is it prints, like, if you're storing screenshots somewhere, I think it just has a link. It provides a link in the output, just like this would look, and you click the link. Right. I don't think it does anything more fancy than that. Could be wrong.
Yeah.
But, I think that's it. I think they're the only. Let's see. Let's go and have a look at the. Yeah. Right line.
Right.
Yeah. So that's it. So it's simple. It's just a simple, I guess, wrapper to. To log to the
just to get some more verbose information, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So so I should probably talk about how I'm achieving this, right? Because I've just talked about. Cool. So what I'll do is I'll just show you. There's one particular package that I'm using, and you may have heard of it. It's called Slow Cheater. Have you heard of it?
No. What is that? Slow Cheater.
Slow Cheater. Let me just go to the installed here. Here. So I think previously it was a thing in its own right, and then it was acquired by Microsoft.
Okay.
So I'm sure it was an open source project or something like that, and then Microsoft were like, okay, this is cool. We'll take, as they do, right? We'll take it in. But basically, all it means is if we go to the configuration manager and we want to add a new one, so we could call it. I don't know, let's call it runway, for example, and we'll just copy the settings from debug. We'll continue. So we've added a new config here. So now we've got runway.
Okay.
So we just need the Slow Cheater package installed, and we come down to this test settings.json. So you would just add a file. You just right click on your project, add a JSON file, and call it. I think you can call it anything, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be setting. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, right? And you can right click here, and you see this add transport.
Right. Okay.
So I think this will do all of them, actually. It does the ones that are missing. So I actually don't want these ones at all. But now we've got one for runway that we can open, and we can specify, let's just copy these from here. And now we have, another environment, runway.
Yep.
And as long as we just select runway here. So obviously this is useful for local testing, right? So if you've got... maybe you're integrating with Browser Stack and you've got a bunch of different target devices. Maybe you've got one config for desktop devices. You've got one config for mobile devices. And you can do this same transformation in your CI/CD pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So it translates. So now we'll just execute the same tests, and we'll see, in our output that we get the values from our config object that represents the configuration. Here you go. So started for environment. Oh, it's missing. Did I miss it? I didn't miss it.
No.
Okay. Well, something clearly happened. What should happen is, obviously, is so one thing that confused me, which would probably confuse a lot of people, is that it doesn't actually update this file. What it actually does is updates the file that's copied into the bin folder.
Okay.
So I was like, for ages, I was like, why is this not updating? And then actually only to realize that if you look in the bin folder, it was updating them.
Okay.
So I don't know why this didn't do it, but it's just going to be something in my project that I've been messing around with. So I won't try and now.
Actually, I literally use this run settings file. So you can use the run settings file to do it. So the configuration I was talking about is this one. Like if we just go to the tests over here, you have this run test file.
Yeah.
The reason why I even have this file is because let's say if I want to run our tests on the app settings.local, something like that. So this is an app settings.local file that I have got, which is gonna run my test on the local Docker instance, like local application, and then local database, and the execution type is local because I want to invoke my WebDriver manager instead of the Selenium grid setup.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this app settings for remote configuration, which is going to be running inside the container. So this is, see, all these are like SQL Server, Selenium Hub, EA Web App, because these are all running inside the Docker Compose using the EA network. Like they're all just running inside like a services. So they are going to be running like that. But because these two files has got their name like .local and .remote, I need to have an environment variable to be passed. Pretty much like how you do in the application, right? Like in the LAN settings, you have this ASP.NET Core environment for development, something like that. So I wanted to replicate pretty much exactly the same way of how it's done in the development code. So what I did is like I ended up writing my own code in such a way that you just write like this. What is that? Yeah.
Where you use the configuration builder stuff?
No, I didn't went very hard way or something like that. See that? Very simple. Just get the environment variable, and because you have this configuration, you can just read the configuration with the specific environment name. And this
you probably could actually use. Sorry to cut across you. Probably could use the configuration builder stuff, right, from the .NET.
Yeah, I use that as well. Oh, here.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Cool.
This one,
okay.
Right?
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. I use that. Only on that place because I'm just reading like a text file there. But over here, see that add JSON file. I'm just reading it from the configuration builder to read it from there. And it's going to be even more interesting because you're going to be just using that run settings file. Because here you're going to pass the ASP.NET Core environment variable as local, which is going to invoke that local file. This one, the app settings.local.json file. And while you try running that from the Docker containers, you just specify the environment as remote over here. So it runs the test on the remote file because these two files are anyways going to be saved on my project. So it's going to go and call this file and then it's going to do it for you. So yeah, it's like I don't know, it's not a trick. Basically, this is how the applications are even working as well behind the scene. Because in test project, you can't use the LAN settings file. It is not honored. Basically, only the tests run settings files have been honored. In order to execute this, you just have to go here in the configure run settings, and you can say auto detect the run settings file, or you can directly choose the run settings files, something like that.
And I guess you could specify this in your CI/CD as well, right? It makes it easier to,
You can do that as well.
Yeah.
But the good thing about this whole project is that you can run the whole Docker Compose in CI/CD in one shot. Yeah.
Cool. So I have one more topic, and that is waiting strategy. So I thought long and hard about this, and it's very difficult to make my point. So my point is that, you know, a lot of modern, especially UI applications, you know, they use a lot of asynchronous JavaScript calls to build the page. And the problem is, especially with Selenium, you can never really know when the DOM is ready, you know, because things happen. You can't necessarily say, for example, let's just spin up this this application again. Sometimes, you know, say, for example, a button. Maybe something happens on the button, or maybe there's some pop-up that appears that might, you know, intercept your click. Whatever the case is, you know, in this case, actually, so if I write this, we can see that I am. There's an attribute that you could hook into, right? So there's this. Oh, let me just hide it again. You should see that it appears. It's now hidden, right? So we have this disabled attribute. This is fine. This is a good use case because we can look for this attribute and determine whether it's ready or not to interact with. But sometimes it can't be avoided, right? There's just nothing you can tap into. There's some styling that's still loading or something, and even if you try and get the page ready state, this doesn't always work. And I've encountered this, you know, multiple times, and this is probably the thing I hate the most about testing UIs, right? And I'm sure you've got experience with this too.
Oh my god, I had this issue. I'll just tell you my experience, like what you're trying to say that, because there are some applications, like some sloppy applications I've worked with, where you try entering the username and password, you click the submit button, and there is this loading icon comes in. but that loading icon won't come instantly. Rather, it takes some time to even appear, to invoke that loading icon. But
Yeah.
our tests will be waiting for that loading icon to appear and disappear.
Yeah.
What happens is the loading icon doesn't even appear instantly, and Selenium test fails because your loading icon has not appeared by the time. So we have to wait for the loading icon to appear and then wait for it to disappear. So which is tricky. Yeah,
and it causes a lot of problems, right? Like, you know, and it's almost like you can get false positive results with this kind of strategy as well. So I think the first point I will make is that sometimes it's okay to have hard waits. So I think especially from my experience, there's a lot of stigma around using hard waits. You know, they're bad. I mean, obviously they have their side effects, right? You're indefinitely adding time to the execution, right? But my argument for this is, and actually I read a really good article from LinkedIn which talked about, or the heading was test slower to test faster. Because if your waiting strategy, you know, if you're avoiding using a hard wait and you're trying to do some other funky magic that can cause exceptions to be thrown, then you're wasting more time trying to achieve these things, and the tests are more flaky than if you were just to use a hard wait, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where this concept test slower to test faster comes in. Although you're adding additional indefinite you know, time that you're waiting, the results you're going to get are going to be more stable, right? And you're going to get right, and you're going to get that feedback that you need for the application itself. So I definitely feel like it, you know, it definitely serves a purpose. So I've actually got inside of my login page here. So you can see I've got the different types of weights that you can have. So we've got hard weights, useful if you can't leverage the other weights. So I think, you know, that's when it should be used only, is when you've explored the other styles of weighting and it's kind of your last resort, right? Because you don't necessarily want to be using. So let me just comment this out. Oops, don't delete it. And uncomment this. Don't delete it, but I've done the same thing twice. Thought I'd learn from my mistakes, but obviously not. Cool. So actually, I've kind of simulated. Let me just launch this this application again. I've tried to simulate. I couldn't think of a good way, or I mean, ultimately, it falls down onto my knowledge of JavaScript really, and writing complex JavaScript, because I don't have that knowledge. But you can see here that this submit button is taking time. You know, it's a random time.
Oh yeah.
So you see what I mean? So submit is being deactivated, and now it's taking more time. So I'm basically generating a random number between I think it's like 0 and 3 seconds basically. So you can see that this introduces some variability, right? This is the point I'm trying to demonstrate.
Yep.
So for example, you know, if we're using hard weights, we can be sure, I mean, you would obviously have to test it, see what's happening to get some stability. But I know that it's not going to take longer than 3 seconds, right? So within our hard weight, let me just show you the code. So you can see here we've got this simulate sometime consuming this JavaScript call, right? So here's the math.floor function, and we're getting a minimum of 500 milliseconds, or what, you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to do. Cool. See. Good. And the same for the modal actually that loads. So if we go back, we know that it's not going to take any longer than 3 seconds. So exactly. So let's execute this test, and it's going to appear on the other screen, but we'll see that it's effective at least if it loads. Come on. There we go. Let me zip it across quick.
And it's like forcing waiting for 3 seconds.
Exactly. So if we didn't have any way of knowing, any way of tapping into the attributes, or of really knowing that the DOM's ready, then this is I'm not going to say a good solution, but this is a solution which will you know, mean that your test is going to be maintainable. It's going to give you what you need. So that's my argument for hard weights, because I know there's some controversial stuff happening. So the next kind of weight is the implicit weight. And my understanding of this is that you know, Selenium by default has, or the user can specify a default weight timeout. So we'll try and locate an element, and basically it polls the DOM, and if the element doesn't appear within that timeout, then it throws an exception, right? That's how it works. And you can configure I think the polling interval as well. So how often it polls, the time, the time between the polls, and the total amount of time that it's looking for. Obviously this is baked in, right? So I can't really show anything other than actually, because I'm using our plugin, I can actually show we're specifying the polling interval and the default timeout from within the config. So the explicit way, this is where we can start talking about conditions, right? It's explicit because we're waiting for something, right? We're being explicit about what we're waiting for.
Exactly.
So we obviously get the wait driver, and we can specify the current driver and the time span. I think it's the polling interval, is it? The sleep interval and the timeout, and actually this clock. And we can add some types to ignore in terms of the exception. So if we're getting an intercepted click or element, all of these things, right? We can specify those things we want to not pay attention to, and then ultimately. In the end, we're just waiting for the submit button to be enabled, and once it is, we continue. So let's run this, and actually it builds again, right? Anyway, let's see this in action. So hopefully we should see now that there you go. Good, and now of course it was because of the configuration. So now we see that it was waiting for the button to be enabled, and then it clicks it.
The click operation. Yeah.
So I guess the point I wanted to demonstrate here mostly was that hard waits do have a use case, and they are okay, and you should use them if if you're spending hours and hours trying to come up with a solution to some weird problem where you're, like you said, you're looking at this spinner, you're waiting for it to be appear and then not appear. It's just worth putting in a hard wait in my opinion.
Exactly. It doesn't matter like 1 second or 2 seconds with a already slow UI testing. I mean, you can do it, but it's no harm in just doing like in a couple of places, but not everywhere. But what you're telling, which is it needs
to be used cleverly, right? It needs to be used where only it's a last resort to to getting it to. Basically, because you want the stability, right? Because you want the early feedback in the test. If you're, if you've got 1,000 tests that are running overnight and you've got to filter through 50 tests, they failed because the test is flaky. Then you have to spend the time, why did this test fail? Going through it only to realize that it's your code, right? So, this can be definitely a good tool if used in the right way. So, cool. And that was my last. That was my last topic, mate. So I think we can wrap it up there. So
awesome.
Well done. There we go. So let me just let me share. Is the slideshow visible? Andy, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Good.
It's here.
Okay, cool. So in that case, that was it. Let me just stop there again for a second because I'm getting some weird audio. I'm just going to uncheck the share sound option just in case that's what's causing it. Cool. Cool. So that was it. So let's hop into the Q&A. There's quite a lot of stuff here. So if anyone, whilst we're going through them, likes the look of a question, then just please give it a little upvote. I can't imagine we won't get round to them all, but if we don't, then we'll answer them after the fact. We can extract them. So let's start from the top then. So we've got one from Ronald. Can you hear me okay with the mic where it is?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yes. So are there plans to move the solid token SpecFlow dependency injection implementation to the SpecFlow repository, as has been done for AutoFac and Windsor? So I've not actually used that. Have you, Andy?
No, I have not. So there are no plans to move it because it doesn't belong us. This was created by the community. If they want to contribute it to SpecFlow and send a PR with it, probably happy to accept it. And we will try that it stays up to date with newer versions with SpecFlow. But what we don't do is we assimilate community project into our code base simply. That's not good behavior in the open source world. So no plans, looking for a pull request from the community member if he wants to do this.
And also, it's probably worth saying that we have our built-in BODI stuff, right? Which can be used, which is perfectly,
Yeah,
perfectly
it's perfectly fine for stuff. Mainly these plugins are used if you have already more or less complex registration logic for your application and you simply want to reuse it in your test automation. Then it's one easy way to with these plugins to reuse that.
Yeah.
That's my main use case for these plugins.
Mm-hmm. Cool. The next one from John is X retry. Will this also rerun the background steps on each retry or just from the scenario? So again, I haven't used it actually.
I know it.
Go on.
What it does is it retries the whole test, and each test contains the background steps and the scenario. So background steps are, short reminder, are not executed once for a feature file. They're executed once per scenario. And as the whole scenario, the whole test gets retried, the background steps are also retried.
Cool. Next one is from Hemal. Sorry if I butcher your name. Does the retry work when the tests are executed as part of a CI/CD process? I would assume so.
Me also.
Yeah, I would assume so. But try it.
Good.
Try it. Yeah.
Yeah, should be. The generated code is the same.
Yeah.
And let's jump on question because there are some other retry questions. Let's stay on the topic.
Okay.
Jordan.
Sure. Yeah.
The waiting period between retries. You have to check the XUnit documentation for that and the plugin.
I don't think so. Based on the conversation I had with Karthik, he said the only way to set it up was to add that tag and there was no additional configuration. So I would assume not, but check it out, as Andy said.
And yeah, the second one is add retry possible on feature level as well. You have to check the plugin. It's not from us. We don't maintain it. It's good to see that.
I was going to say, I would assume that if you add it at the feature level, it adds it at scenario level too, right? Or not?
It depends on how it's implemented. That's
okay.
two things you need to implement there.
Okay. So again,
in SpecFlow.
Go and have a look at the docs or just give it a try, I would say. Oh, is there any more on the retry?
I think that was...
No, that's all. Okay, cool. This one from an anonymous attendee. Do we have SpecFlow support for Mac OS with Visual Studio 2019 for Mac and Visual Studio 2022 for Mac?
The answer for that is so. There's no official supported by the SpecFlow team extension for Visual Studio for Mac. Not from us. There is a community extension out there. I don't know the state of it, if it's work. I think I saw it working in 2019. I don't know if it's already adjusted for 2022. As an alternative to Visual Studio on Mac, I can point you to JetBrains Rider. It's also a cool IDE which works on Windows, Linux, and macOS. And there we have a supported and maintained by us extension for JetBrains Rider.
And if you want to find out more about that, you can go to specflow.org and have a look at the docs there. Or just install the extension. Okay, cool. Does Karthik or anyone have any courses or experiences with using SpecFlow and Win App Driver? We use this tool to run tests against desktop apps using the Appium framework. So the answer to that is I don't know if Karthik has anything like that. I know he has some courses on Udemy, but what I do know is that we have done a webinar on our plugin, which we have for Windows App Driver, which is called SpecFlow Actions Win App Driver, where we help you get started quickly with Windows App Driver, and we've got some docs around that. But nothing too in depth, just to show you how to quickly get started with it. So you might just have to look on YouTube or something. Andy, any?
I created, let's see how much stuff. I did some months ago, a year ago, a stream where I showed how to use Appium to test an Android application with SpecFlow together. I put the link in chat to the playlists. Yeah, but this was before the SpecFlow actions there, so this is directly using Appium to test an Android application. The nice things with Appium is it's the same API that Selenium, so except the setup to start the application, it's the same. You have your find elements, methods. You use the same by ID, by XPath to find the controls, and it's the same API. So everything what works on Selenium should also work on Appium.
Cool. Another one from another anonymous attendee. Just to clarify, how would you find the custom attribute to locate the element? Would you just continue to use by ID? No. So if you're adding custom attributes, you would have to use like a CSS selector or by XPath and locate it that way. Yeah, that's all from me there. Next question from Dobrica. Andy might need to help me with this one. Driver design pattern with page object pattern. I'm not sure I'm familiar with the driver design pattern. So over to you, Andy.
So for me, I think you meant the normal driver pattern here. What you say is what you already saw. So what's the responsibilities? The page object represents your page. This has your buttons, your labels, controls, and abstractors. The abstractors that you can easily access it. The driver is then using this page object for the automation. So the page objects encapsulate all your Selenium WebDriver calls. This all find elements and stuff. This encapsulated this, and you have it now on displays in your code, that you have a nicer API than to automate this page. And this is what you do in the driver. And in the steps, you combine then different parts of the driver, what the driver can do with the page to implement your step. So it's one additional layer of abstraction to make it nicer. For sure, you could call all the WebDriver APIs directly in your steps, but then some ID, some attribute changes, and you have to change it on 25 places. What you only find out via running the tests. And if you have then this nice in a page object, it's one place where you need to change the ID.
Yeah, it's about putting the responsibility into one place, right? So you can consume it elsewhere. And there's a second part to this where it says, and where to do assertion on step definition class or make helper class for assertion. I don't really feel like there's any need to move it. Just put it in the step, right? Put it in your then step.
It can be in the step. You can also put it in the driver. It's not in the page object.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for that question. Next one from Reese. If at time end, could you discuss your best practice to allow a table with a date column to allow, for example, today to be typed? Then this would go off to a regex matcher, match the date today, return date time dot now. Is there any way to do this with step transformations? Yes, but go on.
Sadly, yes, it's possible. Sadly, the create set and create instance method of the sys namespace doesn't look at the step transformations. They have their own value retrievers that translates values in the columns to the values. Give me a moment. I'm looking for the documentation of it. So you need to implement a value retriever to have custom transformation in tables. I put this in chat, and I put also the link as answer to this question. Okay. Always press the wrong button. So type answer. So that's in the documentation how you can implement such a value retriever, and then how to register it, that you can do such things like today.
Cool, thanks, Andy. There's one from Beamy here. Is task.delay over thread.sleep? I'm not actually sure how task.delay works, Andy.
Yeah, so task delay is then when you are in an async await call. So if you're using async await and are somewhere in the call stack where you're working with tasks, you need to use task delay. That's in that case the better one. If you're normal calls, no async await, then thread sleep is the one to use.
Yeah, I did wonder if that was if it would be usable in kind of a synchronous fashion. Okay, cool. Thanks, Andy. Another one from Vimy here, which is it possible to get the project? I think I already put it in our open source project, but if it's not there already, I'll add it, and we'll include the link in the follow-up email that we'll send you. So I'll make sure it's included in there, so don't panic. And there's one here from Abdullah. What is the best practice to extract value from the page and share it with other steps? So you can directly inject your page objects into realistically any consuming class, but usually the step definition's right. So that's the way you would use it. You would use some sort of dependency injection framework like we showcased in the demo, and inject it through the constructor into the class that needs to use it. So hopefully that answers your question. And that was the last one. So if there's not any more, then
yes, last chance. Last change for today to ask us questions.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, while I'm going through the rest of the slides, pop them in there and we can extract them in case we haven't answered any of them. So if you enjoyed today's session and you'd like to know a bit more detail about these topics in general, we've got an upcoming series where we plan to talk about each topic in more detail. So keep an eye out for these. No doubt I'll be posting about them in socials and sharing them on YouTube and all that good stuff, and probably sending some emails to you guys. So keep an eye out for that. Just want to remind you of our Community Heroes program. So if you make a contribution to SpecFlow, whether that's through the open source or maybe you're creating some educational content, something of that nature, then don't let your input go unrecognized. And if you go to specflow.org/community/submit a contribution, let us know about it. And you could potentially get a $25 Amazon voucher.
Yeah, fixing typos in the documentation counts as contribution.
Good, and if I've been anywhere near the docs, there's probably lots of typos, so go and earn some money. Cool, and that's it. So kindly, if you could follow us on our social medias, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, that would be awesome. And please feel free to visit specflow.org. And thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time in the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.